Hey guys, so I am here doing my first live and excited about it. And what we're doing here is looking at Tyler Perry's movie, Mea Culpa, from a lawyer's perspective. So I am not, unfortunately, going to comment about the quality of the movie, which highly debatable, or any of the storylines. But I will talk about what the potential legal issues that I saw that were involved in the movie, mainly the ethics and conflict of interest issues that showed up during the movie. So there were a lot of those. The first one we're going to look at, which was interesting, was the fact that no that Cal's family did not want Mia to represent Zaire. And so obviously there's always this sort of, um, especially for criminal defense lawyers, there's always this, oh, how could you take that case from this murderer? And, he doesn't deserve a good lawyer. Well, the truth is that in the United States, in the legal system, everyone, no matter how innocent or how guilty you are, has the right to effective counsel. And so that's the way that our system's set up. So whether or not you think that someone deserves counsel or not, um, that's a requirement. And so let's look at that sort of from the legal perspective and just looking. And the first thing we would do is, if we were an attorney like Mia and wanted to look at whether or not we should even take this case. Let's start at that point, right? So you go over to the Illinois State Bar Association website, and they have the ethics rules that you must follow when you're sworn in. And so, obviously, when you're sworn in by the bar, you um, swear that you will act ethically in representing your clients. And in order to ensure that attorneys do act ethically, there are actual rules that we need to follow regarding ethics um, and conflicts of interest. So the way they would find these laws, even in or these regulations, places to go to. In this case, since the movie was taking place in Chicago, going to the Illinois State Bar Association, and then going to practice and careers, and you'll see ethics right here. And so then I already have this tab open on another page, so I am going to switch over to that page here, and we'll look at this particular rule, which is scope of Rule 1.2, scope of representation and allocation of authority between client and lawyer. So if we look at this, we'll see right here one that they teach you in law school, and that if you are a criminal defense attorney, which I'm not, I don't specialize in criminal defense, but if you are, you must truly sort of, embody this and believe in this um, rule, which basically says that legal representation should not be denied to people who are unable to afford legal services, which is not the case here because Zaire had lots of money. We know that. But what does apply is, or whose cause is controversial or the subject of popular disapproval. And so everyone thought Zaire was guilty. We're not going to say whether or not he actually was, because we're not spoiling the movie in this review. But whether or not the person is guilty, what the person is accused of, whether or not the general population believes that this is a good or a bad person, does not mean that they can be denied legal representation in the United States. And by the same token, just because an attorney takes on a certain client, that does not mean that we approve of that client's views or their activities. We're doing our job, which we're required to do by the law, which is to, when we do accept a client, we represent them to the best of our abilities, and we look at them just like the court should look at them and any potential jury should look at them, which in the United States is as innocent until proven guilty. So this is a big one. How could you ever bring yourself to represent, the scum of the earth, which, lots of criminal defense attorneys get those sorts of criticisms all the time. Well, that's their job. Everyone in the United States um, has the right to effective legal representation. That's just the way that it is, no matter if you're good or bad. So let's look at the second one. I wonder if there were the second one I wanted to was the fact that Mia's brother-in-law was the DA in the case. The fact that he owned a painting that was actually painted by Zaire, right? And so um, he joked around asking if Cal wanted to buy the painting. And that was actually, I think, the first and maybe only time during the movie that they actually used the term conflict of interest, and the fact that the DA who was going to be prosecuting an artist, Zaire, and he owned a piece of art that artist painted, that was cited as a potential conflict of interest in this case. And let's think about that one. So if you think about what would be a conflict of interest is if the brother-in-law benefited in some way. Well, let's see. So let's think of this. So if the brother-in-law intentionally lost the case and then ended up making a lot of money off of the painting, that obviously would be a conflict of interest. But can you think of that really happening? It sort of seems like the opposite, where if you would win the case and then you now have a piece of art from someone who is guilty of murder and make a lot of money off of it. I mean, I think this is probably one of the questions here. So I wonder if we can find a law that, not a law, an Illinois state rule that addresses finance, something like that. So let's see, actually, let's just Google that. I'm gonna stop streaming for a second, or stop sharing for a second, or actually, let's just Google it. Illinois. Okay, so here we go. Here we go. It looks like 1.8 covers that. Let's go back to rule 1.8. So now we're going to go back to rule 1.8. 1.8, conflict of interest, current clients, specific rules. 1.8, share this tab so you can see this, conflict of interest, current client, specific rules. A lawyer shall not enter into a business transaction with a client or knowingly acquire an ownership, possessory, security, or other pecuniary interest adverse to a client unless. Okay, so let's look at it from this perspective. Cal's client, no, sorry, Cal's brother, the brother in law's client, is technically the people of the state of Illinois. So, one, he's not entering any business transactions with the people of the state of Illinois, so that kind of kicks that out. Or knowingly acquire, so he acquired this painting prior to even being involved in the case. So I don't think that this rule would apply here. Okay, so we're not going to do that. That piece does not match. Okay, so I don't think. Yeah, so I don't see a conflict there. Um, so let's say no, there's no conflict on that. On the DA having one of Zaire's painting and prosecuting him. Um, Now, obviously, everyone has, or everyone who's paying any attention to the movie Mea Culpa understands that Mia slept with Zaire. Okay, that's probably like, let's talk about that conflict of interest. That is totally, it's not just frowned upon. You cannot sleep with your client, with your current client. No, no way, never. Most attorneys would say, and this one included, um, if that person is part of your personal life, romantic life, do not represent them. Whether or not that's past, present, or future, stay away. Um, it just complicates things. It's almost like a doctor that does not want to um, operate on their family member because they need that sort of objectivity and um, sort of lack of real personal connection that might make you act irrational in some way, as opposed to being able to represent them without having any romantic romantic conflicts, romantic feelings somehow interfering with the way that you represent your client. So I think that's the easiest way to put it is you don't want any types of feelings, even to even to have the possibility of those feelings interfering with the way that you are supposed to represent your client. You're supposed to be totally acting in your client's interests. You are supposed to be as objective as you can. Um, and some of us can, and some of us can't do that when it comes to someone that we have are currently romantically involved with. And so I think the rule is a great rule to have for both attorneys and clients. And in this case, um, since she did sleep with her client, What exactly, which rule is that breaking? That's breaking a rule, of course. Let's see if it's specifically outlined in the Illinois rules of ethics. And this one, current clients. So I'm looking now at Rule 1.7, conflict of interest clients. Except as provided in paragraph B, a lawyer shall not represent a client if the representation involves a concurrent conflict of interest. Period. A concurrent conflict of interest exists if 1. The representation of one client will be directly adverse to another client. So in that case, that has no bearing here in the movie Mea Culpa. Or there is a significant risk that the representation of one or more clients will be materially limited by the lawyer's responsibilities to another client, a former client, or a third person, or by a personal interest of the lawyer. This is interesting, and this is one that I did not think about in the movie. A significant risk that the representation of Zaire will be materially limited by the lawyer's responsibilities to a third person, which could be her husband, right? Cal. So since Cal is her husband and has some sort of say in her life, or obviously a husband has influence with his wife, I'm not saying over his wife that she's forced to make any decisions because of her, her husband's opinions. But the fact is that, husbands and wives talk, husbands and wives are influenced by each other. Um, and this, to me, it seems that even though there was not a conflict with her brother-in-law being the DA, there was definitely well, I won't say definitely, there's potentially a conflict here that because her husband's brother is the one who's prosecuting her client, I probably wouldn't take that case myself. Um, just to even avoid that potential appearance of conflict, even if I thought I could, is that best to my client if my husband's brother is prosecuting him and could have some sort of influence over me? Or, even if you think about um, confidentiality, she's at home, when she's at home talking about her case, she's going to have to ensure that her husband is not hearing anything that she's saying and passing that information on to his brother. There's just so many complexities that come into play that would make me want to say, sorry, I shouldn't take your case. I'm not the one to take this case just because, even if there isn't a real conflict of interest, there is the potential for one, and there's the potential for an appearance of one, and we want to avoid that at all cost. Now, all of this is except as provided in paragraph B, right? So we have an exception here. So even if, notwithstanding the existence of a concurrent conflict of interest under paragraph A is just a fancy word, a fancy way of saying, even if these things exist, a lawyer may still represent a client if the lawyer believes that they will be able to provide competent and diligent representation to each client. The representation is not prohibited by law. The representation does not involve the assertion of a claim by one client against another client. That's not happening here. and each client gives informed consent. So here is one of the things that, if you're thinking about the movie potentially behind the scenes happened, is that Mia's firm would have had Zaire sign a waiver of conflict that basically says, you've told me that there is this potential for conflict of interest because your husband's brother is prosecuting me. Um, but you believe you're going to still be able to provide, reasonably believe that you're still going to be able to provide competent and diligent representation. It's not prohibited by law. And you don't have two of the same, one client against another, represented by the same lawyer, obviously not in this case. And so she would have to get him to sign something that says informed consent. This is obviously before she sleeps with him. Okay, so when she sleeps, after she sleeps with him, or at the point that she sleeps with him, this changes. Okay, let's read this just because it seems an interesting comment. Loyalty and independent judgment are essential elements in the lawyer's relationship to a client. Concurrent conflicts of interest can arise from the lawyer's responsibilities to another client, a former client, or a third person, or from the lawyer's own interests. For specific rules regarding concurrent conflicts of interest, see Rule 1.8. Okay, so let's see if we can find a rule that loyalty may not, is it now? Let's look at specific rules. So now we're going to look at these specific rules again. 1.8, we're going back to that. Okay, let's see and try and find anything about romantic relationships. Personal. Okay, so we're not going to find it that way. About agreements, gifts, literary rights, financial assistance, person paying. Here we go. Jackpot. So client lawyer relationships. The relationship between lawyer and client is a fiduciary one in which the lawyer occupies the highest position of trust and confidence. The relationship is almost always unequal. Thus, a relationship between lawyer and client can involve unfair exploitation of the lawyer's fiduciary role in violation of the lawyer's basic ethical obligation not to use the trust of that client to the client's disadvantage. In addition, such a relationship presents a significant danger that, because of the lawyer's emotional involvement, the lawyer will be unable to represent the client without impairment of the exercise of independent professional judgment. So, again, this is really similar to what I said before, where even if you feel that you can represent your client to the best of your ability with this emotional involvement or physical involvement, there is still a danger that it can cause you to not represent your client um, independently and rationally and to the best of your ability. And so, very similar to when a doctor, he can do surgery every single day, type single surgery every single day on people that he doesn't know. But if he asked him to do the same surgery on his wife, he would have that emotional involvement and, depending on the doctor, I don't even know what the rules are for medicine, but in terms of, being a lawyer, yeah, you're not going to want to have that emotional involvement with your clients. You're going to want to be able to exercise independent professional judgment without personal feelings being involved. And so here, let's go on to the next sentence. Moreover, a blurred line between the professional and personal relationships may make it difficult to predict to what extent client confidences will be protected by the attorney client evidentiary privilege, since client confidences are protected by privilege only when they are imparted in the context of the client lawyer relationship. That is super interesting too. So basically, what this is calling out is that generally anything that a client says to their attorney is protected by the attorney client privilege and won't be is not allowed to be introduced into evidence um, at trial it's confidential. It doesn't have to be disclosed. It can't be used as evidence. But that privilege is only extended when the statements that you're making to your attorney are given in the context of the client lawyer relationship. And so if you are doing something romantically, you're not taking the role of a client and a lawyer, you are not seeking the advice of a lawyer, um, and you are admitting guilt or um, just basically making any sort of statement that is made when you're not in that attorney client privilege coverage, that's not technically going to be protected by privilege. And so that would be, obviously your attorney is going to, and they're required to um, fight and advocate for you to try and make sure that any statements that you make to them are protected by privilege. But if there was a way for the state to argue successfully that there was some sort of statement that you made to your attorney that was not in the client lawyer relationship, then that statement might be admitted into evidence. And so again, this is not likely to happen, but the fact that it could happen is the reason why attorneys are supposed to are not permitted to have romantic relationships with their clients. So let's look at this next sentence. This is interesting stuff. Romantic relation. Oh, wait, here, where did we go? Okay, we're here. So I'm going to sign off for now. I don't see anyone in here. And I'm going to try and do some vertical streaming and see what happens. See you soon.